Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your favorite source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
A little peek behind the curtain here.
I'm here, joined by you're joined by your dad, Matt, and his sneezes.
Yes, we're a little peek behind the curtain. We were about 3 minutes into our other recording, and my dad just ripped about the biggest sneeze he could straight into the mic because he thought he had hit the mute
I turned
button.
my head.
Yeah, well, he thought he had hit the mute button, and he just sneezed about as loud as he could. I watched it all happen in slow motion. But anyway.
Like a train wreck.
Yes, it was like a train wreck. But anyway, Dad, we are here to talk a little bit to you about... we are here to talk a little bit today to you about what's been going on in Packers practices the past week, as well as, we have real football on the horizon. Today was the Hall of Fame game. We're kind of, as we're recording to you this Thursday night, as all Hall of Fame games go, there was some shenanigans. The lights went out midway through. When the Packers were part of this 2-3 years ago, the wrong paint was used on the field, and it turned into concrete, and they had to cancel the game. It seems like there's always something going wrong with the Hall of Fame game, but, it's preseason for the NFL too, I guess.
Doesn't the NFL have enough money to make sure that the facilities are okay at the Hall of Fame? Or are they're just going all into somebody's yacht?
Well, we were talking about this earlier. It's like that was also the game up in Canada where they couldn't use the end zones for some reason, and they had to put cones out, which was wild.
Put cones out. It's like, okay, this car's bumper.
Yep. We're playing the guy in the stands with the yellow shirt on is the first end line, and it's you'd think it would be more settled by now, but the Hall of Fame game always has some bumps and hurdles. But you know what?
You know what really happened?
What really happened?
It was Darkness Retreat.
I saw a lot of those.
Rogers did it.
I saw a lot of those memes on Twitter. That was great.
Had to be a bazillion out there.
There was just so many of him, just pictures of him sitting on the bench in the dark. All of them said Darkness Retreat. It was. I was proud of the internet because it was funny. But anyway, the Hall of Fame game though means we're very close to Packers preseason. First game coming up next week, and then we have Family Night on Saturday. Dad, are you excited for Family Night?
Yeah, we'll have more players out of the field, more action we can see video of, as opposed to like one or two videos of team drills that get smuggled out through the across the out of the Iron Curtain.
Oh man! Speaking of which, did you see the hilarious tweet Matt Schneidman had today about the Packers?
Oh, that was amazing. That was amazing.
If you missed it,
somebody whose credentials they did not recognize.
If you missed it, Matt Schneidman tweeted out today essentially that the Packers people had to kick out someone who was pretending to be a Packers videographer with a fake ID card and wearing a Packers polo with a camera, and they were like, we've never seen this person before in our lives, which I think is just comical. But anyway, so that's what's going on in Packers land right now.
Clearly, he is working for the Patriots.
I saw those jokes as well. It's it's a little early, isn't it? We still got a few weeks until those joint practices. But anyway, yeah. So Family Night's coming up. More Packers practices coming up. Lots to talk about from the past week of practice. Lots of exciting things from Jordan Love. But before we get into all of that and start talking about news, notes, and stuff, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. And that is that if you want to come follow us on Twitter, come give us a follow at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes, articles we find interesting, any pieces of news. It's kind of like your one-stop shopping for Packers news. We're retweeting what we find most interesting from what's going on in practice, et cetera, et cetera. Those videos that those aforementioned videos that we were talking about, we're retweeting those whenever we see them. Don't tell anyone. But yeah, and then if you really like what you hear here today, come subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We even have all of our episodes up on YouTube. If you want to come subscribe to us there, it would really help our numbers. Only takes about a few seconds, so we would really appreciate it. But yeah, come hang out with us, I guess, so to speak. Dad, do you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Oh, I was just adding that's but yes, tell people about it.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Tell people about us. That'd be fun. But anyway, so we have a couple of things to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about some news and stuff. We have a piece of research that we just did recently, which, I thought was interesting. I did it, and we'll talk about that in a second. It's pretty much talking about how much do these practices matter? I guess, like, how much do the players
Or
that
how
are
much
getting
do they
talked
tell
about,
us?
exactly, or how much do the players that are getting talked about in these practices like matter, essentially, and like the quantity to which they are being talked about. But we'll talk about all that in a second. But before we get into that and about what's been going on in practice, let's hit on the news really quick. Dad, do you want to start us off with the injury report for the Packers?
Yeah, so some things are unchanged. And it's a mix of good news and bad. Stokes and Gary are still out. It's only 1 week in. We didn't expect, even though there's reports that they'll be ready possibly by week 1, we didn't expect it to be this early. And Grant DeBoe's still not practicing with his back injury of unknown severity, but he hasn't, as far as we know, he hasn't had a practice as a Packer yet. And then, on the good news front, Dontavian Wicks was back today after missing a week with a concussion that he got in the first practice of training camp, and made a really nice move. Apparently, I think he seems to be having some nice lateral movement skills. DeGuara was out today with some kind of calf injury, and that he picked up. He left the field yesterday, left practice early. And then Jake Hansen was out as well. He's been missed a couple practices in a row now with an elbow injury.
Yeah, and for DeGuara, I believe it was Andy Herman saying that he wasn't even on the field, like in his jersey or with his helmet with the team, as some of these other injured players have been, like off to the side. He wasn't even out there, so probably a little bit more of a severe injury with that calf injury, and probably going to miss some additional time. Unfortunately, it sounds like, just based on kind of reading the tea leaves there. Beyond that, though, there are also some transactions for the Packers. Lots of comings and goings, actually, in the last week.
Yeah.
The Packers,
we're in that time of the season where Gutekunst is just churning the bottom of the roster.
Yeah. And some players that have, played some snaps for the Packers in the past are no longer with the Packers. In the past week, the Packers have released Jonathan Garvin, unfortunately on his birthday, Ladarius Hamilton, so two edge rushers who had played some substantial snaps, albeit mostly special teams, with the Packers in the past. Chuck Filiaga and then Cameron McDonald were also both released. And the corresponding moves, the Packers signed Andre Miller, wide receiver, who had previously been converted to tight end, and I believe will be playing wide receiver for the Packers. He's a very big receiver.
He had mentioned he is back to wide receiver, and that he's now trying to lose the weight that he gained to move from wide receiver to tight end.
Yeah, but he's a big receiver, good relative athletic score at 9.6, really great size and explosion, decent speed and agility. And the Packers also signed Cole Schneider, a center who had been in Green Bay training camp last year. That kind of makes me think maybe they think Hansen's going to miss some extended time, the fact that they're adding a center there. And then they added Aaron Mosby, edge rusher off of waivers from the Panthers. Not much of an athlete, a relative athletic score of just 3.93. He's poor at pretty much everything except for speed. Was apparently someone that the Packers had been interested in previously. I believe Ryan Wood reported that, which is, also interesting. And then the Packers also signed James Empey, another center off of waivers from Tennessee. Not the best athlete, 2.58 relative athletic score, but good PFF pass blocking scores, over 80 in all 4 years out of BYU in 2021, and was on Miami's practice squad last year. Interesting that they're adding another kind of maybe point of evidence towards Hansen maybe missing some more time, or them just not being particularly happy with the centers that they have. Anything that strikes you there, Dad?
Yeah, and I should just mention, I think Empey was the one they added first.
Yes.
And then Schneider was added second. And I don't know quite the timeline of Empey first being added or contacted and Hansen's injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
whether they're bringing him in even regardless of the injury. That I'm not sure of. They may have had their eyes on adding Empey even before Hansen was going to have to sit out for a while.
Yeah, and so it seems like they're adding some more players to like the bottom of that center, some more depth at center. But those are the main pieces of news for the Packers. The only other one is Family Night on Saturday. So if you can find a stream, last 2 years ago, I think I found one on Facebook. If you know where to look, you can find one.
I mean,
if you're in Wisconsin,
it's being broadcast
on TV.
It's like a dozen channels across the state.
Yep, and
it's going to be broadcast on.
Not crossing state lines though. But anyway, the first thing that we wanted to touch on though, as we talk about practice today, is a bit of research that I did because, a lot of people might be wondering, does all this camp stuff matter? Does, these reports about how these players are doing or, the mentions of these players really matter? And, why should we really be paying attention to what's happening if it's just practice? So, I was kind of interested in that and, trying to see if there's a tangible way to measure, the importance of that. And so what I did was a bit of a study, essentially looking to see if there was any connection between the amount a player was talked about during the offseason and their impact on the team during that season. And so what I did was I used an internet wayback machine to get the 90-man roster from late July of 2022 last year. And then there's an excellent Redditor.
Deep in the past.
Yes, deep in the past in 2022. But then there's an excellent Redditor by the name of U2Point Perversion is their screen name on Reddit, who does an aggregation, essentially, of each practice of all the tweets during that practice, each offseason. And so I took every single one of his posts from 2022, and I built a scraper, essentially, to take all of the text off of these posts and essentially count the number of times each player's name was mentioned. I only went by last name, so I took the players who had duplicate last names out of the sample just for ease. And so I essentially got a count, essentially, of every player that was mentioned. The player that was mentioned the most was Jordan Love, with 106 mentions last year, out of a total of, I believe, 1,300 player mentions, all in all, around there. Then I decided to essentially use the metric number of snaps played, offense or defensive snaps, as essentially a player's impact on the team. So I looked at essentially all of the snaps that the Packers players played in 2022 on offense or defense.
And one thing I just say about that, one reason for doing that is it gives you the same measurement regardless of position.
Yes.
So that you can compare players regardless of what position they play.
Yeah, and obviously there are some flaws there. Offensive linemen play more snaps than some other players, et cetera, et cetera. And offensive linemen are also probably mentioned less often in camp than, quarterbacks, for instance. Like we said, Jordan Love is mentioned the most because Rodgers was pulled out because we had Amari and Aaron Rodgers. And, it's an imperfect study, but I still found it was interesting because essentially what I found is there is a pretty decent correlation between the number of mentions a player has during the offseason and the number of snaps they play during the season, with an R-squared value of 0.121, but a p-value of 0.0016, which indicates essentially that this correlation value would be unlikely to be produced by two uncorrelated pieces of data. And so essentially the conclusion is the more a player is mentioned during the offseason, the more they're going to play during the season. And obviously there's a lot of caveats to this. Reporters are more likely to report on players who are going to make the team. Reporters are more likely to report on good players, et cetera, et cetera. But, still something interesting. It is good to be mentioned during the offseason. If you're mentioned during the offseason, you're more likely to be impactful during the season. Just something that I found interesting.
Yeah, but I would even say those caveats reporters are going to talk about good players, and we're actually trying to find out if there's a correlation between whether a player is any good and the being mentioned by the reporters.
That's a good point.
And so this is exactly what you're trying to determine here. Just because somebody's mentioned, does that mean they're good enough to play?
That's true, because maybe we're measuring essentially the number of snaps is how good they are, and so it's the number of mentions is measuring how good they are, aka the number of snaps. But right. Still something interesting. It is good to be mentioned in camp, and so that's also something to keep in mind is players who are kind of just flying under the radar. It's not exactly a good thing necessarily.
If you're never getting noticed.
And obviously the R-squared isn't super, it's not very close to 1, but that low of a p-value is still something that is, it's notable. But anyway, enough with the statistics and nerd talk. Let's talk a little bit about what has been going on in camp. Because, we have determined that it is important what we are talking about here in Packers training camp. Let's talk first, Dad, Let's talk a little bit about the positives. Let's start good. Let's start with the good. We'll end with the bad. A little sugar before the medicine. And then, maybe we'll add a little couple. Unless you want to start with the negatives. Would you rather go that order, or how are you feeling?
I could go either way. Whether we want to talk about, if you ask what I usually do, I usually eat the sugar in the first 5 minutes after I get to work. Make my lunch. I got like a piece of candy. It's gone, but like 5 minutes after I sit in front of my computer.
That's breakfast candy.
If I were to follow my usual behavior, then we'd be covering the good stuff first, and then But are bad performances the healthy food? I mean, it doesn't seem right either.
I don't know if this.
This analogy is breaking down faster than we can finish talking about it.
I don't know if this analogy worked, but anyway, let's start with the positives. So let's talk a little bit about. We'll go every other. Let's talk about some of our biggest positive surprises and developments from the past week of camp so far, Dad. Actually, do you want to just have like a general Jordan Love discussion before we talk about anything else? Because I think that is really the biggest thing so far. Is if you haven't been paying attention to camp so far, Jordan Love had on Saturday his best practice of, or widely considered by most reporters who were there, his best practice as a Green Bay Packer. He was sharp, 16 of 22. He was hitting deep balls. He was very in command of the offense. Most of those incompletions were throwaways or spikes. He was moving the ball. Really exciting. And then in some other, I think it was Monday's practice, it would have been first one with pads. He hit a deep ball to Christian Watson. I believe it was on Monday. Don't quote me.
60-yarder.
Yeah, big 60-yarder to Christian Watson. He hit an awesome on-the-run like floater to Jaden Reed on the right sideline that was unfortunately dropped by Reed.
Yeah,
and
it was on target though. I guess you say it hit his hands.
I think it was his more impressive throw than the one to Watson. But a lot of positives coming out for Jordan Love, and obviously we want to temper our expectations. I think we're really going to learn a lot from these joint practices next week with Cincinnati. But, Dad, what are your thoughts on all this talk regarding Jordan Love? Do you think people are kind of getting a little carried away? Do you think – how are you feeling?
Well, I think there's probably a little bit of people forgetting the earlier struggles. That he had pretty low completion percentage through the first couple of practices, and then he had his best day on Saturday. And then I think back again on Monday – the completion percentage wasn't as great again, though there've been a fair number of drops, which we'll talk about.
We said we'll end with the negatives.
So he's had, I'd say, kind of a mixed camp, but this day on Saturday was, and some people said not only his best practice. I think I saw some people write it was his best day as a Packer.
Yeah, and it's good that that's happening. It's just about how much you want to read into it, And
yeah, one thing we talked about last time was how much were we going to be worried about him being off target? The things like his decision making has been good, which is certainly better than his last year in college.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing in my opinion is the fact that the decision making seems to be consistent practice to practice. Accuracy is wavering a little bit, and obviously you prefer him to be accurate than inaccurate. I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel saying that. But, I think the decision-making is the most important thing, and you hope the rest of it kind of comes with getting more rhythm with these receivers. Like, for instance, today, like, he had, I think, it was a crosser to Christian Watson that Watson dropped that was, I think Andy Herman said was probably like one of his best throws of camp so far. And the fact that we're seeing, like, those, like, quote-unquote best throws of camp, like, happen a few days in a row here is really exciting. And the reason I wanted to start with Jordan Love and maybe spend a little more time talking about him is, that's all this season that's all that matters this season. It really is. It's all that matters. It's how good he is this year. That's the only thing that matters for the Packers.
All about evaluating Jordan Love because nobody's really expecting the Packers to, be competing for Super Bowl.
If the Packers only win. If the Packers only win 6 games, like Anders Carlson misses like 8 game-winning field goals, and the defense gives up 35 points a game. Like if Jordan Love is good and we only win 4 games, I would still consider that like a good. Like that's good. Like that's fine. Obviously, it wouldn't be super enjoyable as a fan to watch, but I would still have a good amount of optimism going into the following year. And I think that's like the big thing is like how does Jordan Love look is pretty much the only thing that matters. Like, and so, we kind of have to just kind of, we're almost forced to look at all of these practices under a microscope because I think it's just like we're also excited to see how he is, and there's so much anticipation for how he's going to look, and so we're kind of latching on to any positive we can and like getting really excited about it. And obviously I'm trying to temper my expectations, but it's hard. It's hard to temper your expectations when you're like, oh, like he had his best day of practice. Oh, he's like made this really good throw. It's like, oh, like he threw a ball straight to Quay Walker. It's like, okay, that happens. That happens.
Right,
it's like,
the numbers. That was probably dropped. That was like
it was
everything went wrong with that play.
Exactly.
Offense and defense.
But then it was like, oh, he came back and he's like, is throwing like he's hitting like Romeo Dobbs on an out route. He's et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like, yes, all these things are happening. What are your thoughts on the juxtaposition of, hey, we're hearing a lot of good things about Jordan Love, and on this other side, the offense has not been successful. They have not been good in 2-minute drills at all. They have not really. I mean, they haven't done much move the ball. They like what are your thoughts on the juxtaposition there between Jordan Love looking by all accounts like pretty good, like not amazing but pretty good, and the offense itself being bad?
It actually doesn't surprise me. If you look about the number of players that have turned over in the last 2 years on offense compared to defense, you would expect the offense to be much less cohesive, where everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what is expected of them, where to go, where to be, and being used to how things are going to look and interact. While the defense, a lot of the preferred starters have been there for a little while now.
That's true. You have the advantage
It's actually not that surprising. I think even more so than the usual, defenses ahead of the offense.
That's true. But you have the advantage of continuity, and when you say it like that, it's like if you look at the roster on paper, I think most people would say the defense has a lot more talent than the offense as well. But the counter
certainly has more first round picks.
Well,
you know why? Because they only have.
Well, the counterpoint
one
is
first round pick.
Well, the counterpoint is most defenses in the league probably have more talent than the Packers offense, right? Or at least most of the better defenses in the league have more talent on paper, maybe, than the Packers offense. I mean, you could say, hey, like in terms of like stars on the Packers offense, it's like Bakhtiari, Aaron Jones, Elton Jenkins. It's kind of it, unless we really expect a jump from Christian Watson. Christian Watson's had a bit of he's had an up and down camp, so I don't want to put that level of expectation, or like I don't want to call him a star yet, So it's like, hey, I'm still trying to temper my expectations. I don't want to get overly excited, but just because the offense as a whole has not been amazing, but it's good to see good flashes from Jordan Love. I guess is where I land in the end. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say wrapping it up on Jordan Love before we move on to some other stuff for the Packers offense.
I think this is like it's sort of as you said, it's a discovery season. So to find out what Packers want to find out what's there.
Yeah.
How good is he?
And that's
Can
almost
he carry a team?
That's almost exactly what Mark Murphy said. He was like, "Well, we'll find out like halfway through the year if Jordan Love's good." He pretty much said it really bluntly.
Yes,
it was crazy.
People were like, "What is on the clock?" It's like, okay, 8 weeks, buddy. Better pick up the pace.
Murphy will say just whatever's on his mind. Whatever is on his mind.
If you need to find out secrets about what's going on in the Packers, just get Murphy in front of a microphone.
He will say the first thing that comes to his mind. Complicated fella. But anyway.
Which reminds me of his. Did you see the interview of him about the 65%? It's like the only thing he really does, like for Aaron Rodgers to play 65%, and if they struggle, that would be, I'm not rooting for them to fail, but if they struggle and end up like only winning 4 or 5 games, that would be good for us.
I totally missed that, but he's not wrong.
Yeah, he actually said that in an interview.
I mean, he's not.
Well, he's being honest.
Yeah, I mean, he's the president of the Packers. What else is he going to say?
And he's chuckling the whole time he's saying it too. I think.
I bet because it's kind of like it's obviously so. It's like, but hey, we'd like a better pick, obviously. But anyways, do you want to talk about maybe the next thing that some positives on offense? Like that was more of like a hey, what do you think type of thing. But let's talk about some actual positives with the offense, some tangible positives, I guess.
So one thing that I wanted to bring up here is that. Jaden Reed has been better than I expected. Better than I expected when he was first drafted. I did not. It was not somebody I had really on my radar for that high. I thought he was going to go later. I didn't think he necessarily hit the thresholds that they were looking for. And then he didn't really do much in OTAs either. He was kind of invisible there. But now with training camp, he is looking a lot better than he was before, and better than I expected to be. He's looking faster. I mean, yes, so the Packers reported that, we bet he's like 4.45, I think. And the Packers are like, we got him at 4.37 on your, sundial?
Yeah, it's like, okay. It's like, I guess, if you just want to take some time off.
But he looks like he's got good play speed. He's been fast on the field. The end around and hitting the hole and going through sometimes untouched and running upfield. And his change of direction looks really good. Not so many like extra choppy steps. He's like kind of quick in and out of his cuts. He's looking fast and explosive when he's got the ball in his hand. And he's been showing the ability to get open.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of excited about Reed. I think he's already moved up to number 3.
Yeah, I was like, just to tack on to the point about how he was pretty quiet in OTAs and minicamp. I was like a little, maybe he's just going to be kind of just okay. He's like not going to be that great this year. He's got more to learn than we thought he did. But he's really put together a nice training camp through the first week or two. And honestly, I feel like I'm hearing the most positive things of all the Packers receivers about him through training camp, at least. We heard a lot about Dobbs through like minicamp and off season. Watson's been pretty quiet so far. He's had a couple nice deep catches, but he's struggled with drops. Yeah. But I do feel like, Reed has had a couple drops as well. He had that drop down the right sideline on probably Jordan Love's best throw that we've seen, at least. And then he had another drop in the back of the end zone earlier in camp. And, he's a rookie. He's working on it. And he should catch those, and I'm sure he'd say the same. But I feel like we're hearing – am I crazy to say I feel like we're hearing the most positive things about him of the Packers receivers?
Maybe things that have, connected. But I would say we were hearing some positives about like Watson getting open a fair amount, but then like the throw not being on target. It was missed in a couple of times, but Reed has actually been producing. And I remember thinking like, well, maybe Wicks can be our number 3 early on.
Yeah, I remember thinking it was like, it's probably going to be like Toure, or we're just not going to be running many 3 receiver sets this year during minicamp. I was like, yeah, it's like, okay. It's like, I guess it's not the worst thing, but a little disappointing.
I think Reed is looking like he's going to be everything and more that they were hoping to get when they drafted Amari Rodgers.
Yeah, I think hopefully, fingers crossed, but it sounds like he's more comfortable on punt returns than Amari was. If he fumbles one, I want him taken off of punt returns. I don't want his confidence shattered like they did to Amari. I still think they kind of did Amari dirty, just leaving him back out there. But
how many times did they let him fumble before they finally took that job away? It's kind of crazy.
You don't want to know. It's like more than 5. It's kind of a crazy number.
It's like 8 or something.
But
Reed looks like he's got a lot more burst. I mean, he's got some real speed.
Yeah, and
he can run away from defenders.
It's exciting. He's getting some end around touches. I think Andy Herman said he ran like one of the best routes he's seen in all of camp. Today actually. He said after because Wicks ran it, and then Wicks ran a great route, and then Reed ran a great route, and he said he almost left practice early just to go record something about those 2 routes, which was funny. But anyway,
yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, the other thing you just said about Reed is he didn't actually play all that much slot in college.
No,
he was a 5'9" outside receiver.
Yeah, which is kind of
in college.
Yeah, and we know the Packers like to move their receivers around, so he'll probably be playing all over the place. But it seems like he's kind of nailed down that slot role for now, and Toure is kind of more cemented in that 4 role. And then I think there's a sizable gap between 4 and 5 right now in the receiver room.
Yeah, well, Wicks has had 1 practice, and Dubosa's had none. Well, and then you have Bo Melton, and Heath.
Yeah, and Heath has kind of slowed down after a good mini camp, it sounds like.
Yes.
But anyway, the next positive that I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if it's positive, but it's kind of a positive. I don't know. It's nice to see more competition at positions that might be positions of weakness. And what I'm talking about is we have seen some snaps with Zach Tom at center with the ones, which is very interesting. It seems like they are kind of more open to the idea that it is 3 people competing for 2 spots between Myers, Tom, and Josh Nijman. It seems like they are going to take the 2 best of those 3 and just kind of slide them wherever they are, which, kind of seems like it means probably Zach Tom's already in. They're going to put Zach Tom in one of those 2 spots and it really seems like it's more Myers and Nijman
versus Myers.
Which one is better? And they're just going to put Tom at whichever spot is left. Which is, I think it's a good thing because, Myers had the worst PFF blocking grade amongst the top 6 offensive linemen for Green Bay last year. Obviously, PFF grade is not the end-all be-all, but it is a useful tool. And Tom was back at right tackle today, but that was with Bakhtiari taking the day off and Nijman at left tackle, so a bit different than their standard starting offensive line. And so I just think it is good to have that competition because, it seems like Myers has been struggling a good amount, and we can talk about this when we talk about the negatives, or we can talk about it now, whichever you want. Myers has kind of been struggling a lot with, fumbled snap exchanges, not just with Love, but with other quarterbacks as well. I think he had one with Etling as well, and Clifford as well. I think he had one with Etling and with Clifford.
Each of them.
But it just seems like, he's struggled. Slayton's kind of blown him up a few times, and he was a second-round pick 2 years ago, and they clearly saw a lot in him. He's had some good. He's just really up and down. He's just really inconsistent and have awesome blocks where he's and he was a really good pass blocker last year, and he moves really well. He's a really good athlete. He's huge. He moves well for his size. They feel comfortable pulling him as a center. Centers don't pull that much, but it's just he's just so inconsistent because he'll just whiff blocks in the run game and there'll be a dude in the backfield.
I'm just saying you'll have times where he just whiffs completely. Yeah. He's the defender's already run by him and he turns as blocking Elton or somebody.
Yeah, it's
because the defender's already gone through the gap.
It's just not super tenable. And I speaking of Elton, why don't you think they have given any consideration to putting Elton as center?
It's a very good question.
They're not. They have no interest in exploring that. He played center in college. That was his main position in college, and they just have no interest in playing him at center. I don't know if it's necessarily a bad decision. I'm not critiquing the decision. I just think it's kind of interesting because he played center a lot in college. He was good at center in college, and they're no, you're gonna stay at left guard. And I just think that's, I don't know. Maybe they don't like their other options at guard, which is fair. The next guard up is probably Newman. Unless you want to move Myers over to guard, which
right, because that's what I think. If Tom takes a center job, then I think Myers becomes the primary backup at guard.
Yeah, that's probably true. Because it sounded like when they drafted him, they were comfortable playing him at multiple interior spots, but he has only played center in the NFL. So I don't know. I'm excited for Tom. He's put on 15 to 20 pounds, he said in an interview after practice. So should be able to hold up on the interior more than he was able to as a rookie. I think he did struggle with some power at times as a rookie. But yeah, so it's exciting.
I would say one thing, though, is I say being a center, I feel like Tom's best position is tackle because of his ability to move in space.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And, tackle's the most valuable position, but also Nijman can't play anything but tackle. So
yeah, no, I just think it may limit his
it would probably be better
upside.
It would be better for the Packers if Myers can win that job and hold it steady. Because if he can't, they're just down an offensive lineman, which is not great. But anyway, that's my next positive is just we're seeing them being open to having competition at that center spot. It's kind of a negative also because Myers has kind of opened that door to competition, but it is what it is.
They said before OTAs, the video OTAs, that this was going to be a competition, and there was no sign of it until yesterday.
Yeah, or 2 days ago or whatever it was.
Or 2 days ago, whatever that practice was.
But no, that was my next positive. We're actually seeing a competition there. What's your next positive for the offense?
So my next one was we have seen some signs of positive play from Sean Ryan in the one-on-ones over the last just couple of practices that he went after the pads came on. He went 8. He's gone 8-0 in the 1v1s over the last 2 practices. Now, I would say that one thing that gives me a little pause is, if I understood this right, all 8 were against Colby Wooden.
Yes. But, Colby Wooden's had a pretty good training camp.
He's been doing good in like the 2-minute drills and various team drills. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I think Colby Wooden is bad. I would just feel better about it if he was beating multiple players.
Yeah, and he wasn't just
and not just one.
Maybe it's just a good matchup for him or something. I see what you're saying. Yeah. But it's better than he was. We are moving
beat by everybody.
Moving in the right direction because, Matt LaFleur mentioned, we talked about in our last podcast that Matt LaFleur mentioned that he's in like the best shape he's been in. He really struggled about as much as a rookie can in their first year. Like literally can't probably struggle more than that. Couldn't even get on the field and then got suspended and for performance enhancing drugs. And, it was just a pretty much a complete disaster of a rookie year. But if they can get like a serviceable guard out of him in his second year as a 3rd-round pick, that would be gravy. Because I think a lot of people, including myself,
kind of given up,
written him off already through 1 year. It was like, the Packers' 3rd-round curse strikes again.
I gotta say the 3rd-round label did not help him in that regard.
I think I would have more hope for him if he was a 5th-round pick, honestly. But it's good news. It's moving in the right direction, and if they can add some more depth on that O-line, it's exciting because he was a pretty good prospect coming out of UCLA, and he's a big guy. He's got decent movement skills, and it'd be good. Do you have anything more you want to add there? Or should we move on to another positive?
That was the main thing, that he actually maybe Ryan just needed a little more time to put together and realize what it takes to be a pro.
Yeah, and maybe it's like maybe his body needed to develop as well. It sounds like he didn't think he was in good enough shape last year, and it sounds like he kind of really focused on that. And if he's able to kind of like bounce back from that year, more power to him. My next positive for the Packers is that Tyler Goodson is looking quite good, and I think the most encouraging thing, the reason I wanted to bring this up, is the ways he is being used are really exciting to me. He's getting end-around touches, he's getting split out wide, he's getting put in the slot, et cetera, et cetera. It's really reminiscent of the Tyler Ervin role, which they have not had since Tyler Ervin was on the team. And I really thought that the offense
it's amazing.
It's amazing. It's
still 5 years later, and it's still called the Tyler Ervin role because they haven't been able to find anybody to do it.
Someone on I want to say Pack-A-Day said that literally the other day. It's like it's literally still called the Tyler Ervin role. This guy played for like 1 year total for the Packers, and maybe played like 13 games, and it's still called the Tyler Ervin role. But the thing is, Tyler Ervin was really good in that role, and the offense felt a lot more threatening when they had like a dedicated player in that role who was an actual threat, who could make people miss with the ball. Like, giving it to Christian Watson is like, obviously Watson is really good at that, but he kind of needs a bit of a runway and a little more of an opening, and then once he's up to top speed, it's awesome. But he's not the type of guy to kind of like make a quick move, make someone miss, get a couple extra hard-fought yards. Like, that's not really his game as much.
But it also, if you put him in that role, you're taking him away from the other role.
Exactly, yes. And the fact that...
I remember hearing like some people referring to a study where if they have the motion where they put like when Irvin's just in there, like the efficiency of the offense was better than when he wasn't.
Yeah, and the thing is, Rodgers didn't like motion. It is what it is. More motion, I think, is going to be good for this offense, and having a dedicated player in that role, I think, is really exciting because, like I said, when Irvin was there, it felt like giving him the ball was really threatening and was really useful. And Goodson, it sounds like, is breaking off big runs in practice. He had like a 36-yard run today. He's been playing really well. He's been catching the ball well. And the only question is, will the Packers keep 3 running backs? Because they didn't last year. I think it would be nice if they were to keep 3 running backs, if the third running back was a bit more of a gadget player who could kind of do a lot of different things. Like, Irvin used to work in the receiver room and the running back room. There was that game against San Francisco where he was the primary running back, essentially. He was the only running back on, like, getting touches that day, I think 2-3 years ago. And
I think it was, was it a COVID?
I think it was a COVID injured issue, or it was probably a combination. But if they keep 3 running backs, I would be excited if it was Goodson. I think the gadget ability is more... I don't know. Is it more important than special teams? Maybe. I don't know. That's a tough call to make, but
I think they've got a lot of special teams players out there.
Yes, they have a lot of dedicated special teamers. They don't need the third running back to. But here's the thing: will they even keep 3 running backs? Probably not. But it'd be cool if the one they did had some extra juice and was able to be used in a gadget role. That's my final word on that.
Goodson is my favorite running back for them to make the third running back, whether it's through call-ups or on the 53. And probably if they only start with 2 and they call up running backs, I think by the time the season's over, that there will be a third running back who's on the 53 at some point.
Mm-hmm. They ended up bringing Patrick Taylor up at the end of the year last year.
And I just think Goodson's got a much higher upside than any of the backup running backs. Higher than Nichols, higher than Taylor. His speed alone,
fastest
puts
running
him
back
ahead
on
of
the
those
team.
guys. There's a high correlation between running back success and speed. He's also can catch out of the backfield, which Nichols has sadly not been able to do so far.
Yeah.
He's been apparently what I hear is he's dropping a lot of balls, though. I guess he had some nice runs. But I think, and Goodson is the only other back they have who in any way approximates Aaron Jones.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, and it's hard to approximate a running back like Aaron Jones. I mean, he's a Pro Bowler, so. But yeah, and it makes sense to have someone who is stylistically similar, so you don't need to change too much about your offense if Jones were to miss time. Should we move on to our next positive? We're already getting a little long on time, and we haven't even hit our negatives yet. We might need to cut the negatives down. What a shame. My next positive is on the defense. Carrington Valentine might be an actual rotation level player, which is always great when you are able to find a contributor in the 7th round. It's not very common. Usually these guys are, they're just kind of on the roster special teamers, usually bouncing around, just end of the roster guys. But multiple PBUs and multiple practices, pick 6 on Danny Etling, although, the film is out there. We've retweeted it. It's mostly just a really bad throw. Sorry, Danny Etling.
I must not have seen him because he just breaks on the ball and just picks it off really easily.
I mean, it's also just not to. It's
out in the flat.
Well, no, it's completely on the wrong shoulder. It's like way inside, and the guy's running it out, and the ball is essentially just straight. It's not a great throw, but he held on to it, and he's had some. He's gotten burned. He got burned by Bo Melton, I think, once. I think one of the reporters said. But for the most part, it sounds like he's had a really good time. I know Andy Herman of Pack-A-Day said that he is his most impressive rookie so far, which is, that's a lot of praise for a 7th rounder. That's really unexpected. He was someone that Mel Kiper of ESPN was really high on. He had him as a early 5th round grade, I believe. And, he's got really good athleticism. He's got good size, got good length. Sounds like he's got good grit and determination, all the things you like to see in a corner. But yeah, so that's exciting to possibly get a decent player like that at the end of the draft. That's awesome. Any thoughts on what you've heard about Carrington Valentine so far? Or
yeah, it's been good. It's done well. Sometimes he's been matched up with Watson, getting his hand in there to break up passes. He's got speed and size and long arms. He is another outside corner.
Yeah. They have a lot of those.
So that's the one thing is they have a lot of outside corners right now and not that many slot corners.
Wait, time out. What is the plan with Stokes? Is there a plan?
This is something we brought up earlier. It's I don't know what their plan is. What's going to happen when Stokes... It's what we have... I wish we could, can any of these corners convert to safety successfully?
It's probably Rasul because he's the biggest, but we've never seen him do it, so it's
And they talked a little bit about it last year, and then they just basically gave up on the idea.
Yeah.
So did it not look good in practice?
They did it for 2 days in practice and then never went back to it. So I can't imagine it went amazingly. I don't know.
Right. Rasul is not an inside. He's not a slot corner.
No, it did not go well last year. I think it was.
Did not go well.
It went okay. He wasn't bad. It was not. It did not help him use his talents to the best. He's such a better outside corner than he is an inside corner.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like they want to use Jair inside. He's good at it, but they don't want to do it.
Stokes and I think Stokes and Valentine are not inside either. So they've got kind of a logjam at outside corner where they have quality, talented players, and they're going to have to sit somebody.
Yeah, I don't really know what they're going to do because they have a bit of a. It's not a bad problem to have, I guess.
It's only because it's okay to have extra good players if you have good players on the field at all the other positions. Which
yeah. If they could,
not quite so sure about that.
If they could swap one of their corners for a good safety, I mean, those player for player trades never ever happen in the NFL. So I'm not saying this is going to happen, but that would probably be ideal. But yeah, that was my next positive. Did you have another positive?
So mine is also on defense now. The next one, and it's basically I'll just lump the defensive line all together because they seem to be performing pretty well so far. And I hope this isn't fool's gold like last year where we've got the best defensive front ever.
Little
know
did
why
we
that
know.
was.
Yeah, we've talked about it in a lot of episodes.
It became evident.
Go check some other episodes. We'll tell you why the defensive line looked so good. It rhymes. It rhymes with Boyce, Boomin, and Bake Benson.
But Devontae Wyatt is actually starting to look like a first rounder.
Yeah, he's put together some good stuff. The only thing that gives me some pause is I was going to talk about this later, but we'll just get out of the way now. Is he's still behind Slayton on the depth chart, which in some ways it's like, hey, Slayton's a better run defender. When you got two down linemen only, you want them to be able to hold up to double teams. But you would hope a first rounder would be able in his second year would be able to beat out like a third year fifth rounder. But maybe it's a testament to how well Slayton's playing. We've been hearing a lot of good things out of camp about him.
Slayton has also been playing well.
Yeah,
disrupting, getting in the backfield. This play, as we said, they dropped 10 in coverage and left Slayton alone against the offensive line, and he still got pressure,
which is crazy. And also, what are we doing, guys? Just put three dudes on him. What are we doing?
I think what he did is he pushed Myers back into the quarterback.
Allegedly, we have no proof of that, but that's
we don't
probably.
know. I haven't seen that. I think that's awesome. But Wyatt's been apparently doing better against the run and has been getting in the backfield. It's particularly against Myers, pushing him over on his butt, but also beat Runyon in one of the 1v1s.
Yep, and we're hearing with a nasty spin move. Apparently, it was talked about a lot after practice. I think they were talking to, oh goodness, who was it? It wasn't Kenny.
Were they interviewing a player?
They were interviewing another player about Wyatt's spin move, and he was talking about you blink and he's gone or something like that. But yeah, and then what was it? I mean, we've been hearing some good things from Wooden. Brooks Carl Brooks since the pads went on has been knifing into the backfield a lot. It sounds like I'm really excited for Carl Brooks. I don't know. I have an irrational level of excitement for him. I know he's fifth on the depth chart right now, but I'm still excited. He was just his Bowling Green tape was just so fun. I know it's a Bowling Green, but still. But yeah, so it's exciting. I think they need Slayton and Wyatt to be good is the thing. That's the problem is they actually need them to be good because if they're not, we're going to have a lot of problems on defense, I feel like. But yeah, so it's exciting.
Yes, we were talking about what their average yards per carry against have been over the last year and the last few years.
Yeah,
and so they need a better performance from their defensive fronts to plug up some of those holes, and then also disrupt the play in the backfield more often and not give up so many runs that end up getting tackled by safeties, 15 yards down the field.
Hey, I don't think we're going to have many runs getting tackled by safeties, if you know what I mean. I'm just saying.
Problem solved.
I'm looking at our safeties. I don't know if we're going to have many. But anyway, the next positive I wanted to talk about, unless you wanted to add anything there, is that Lucas Van Ness this week, we talked about last week, we were a little concerned that he wasn't, but now he's getting some snaps with the ones across from Preston Smith. Obviously, if Gary was in there, he would not be. But it is good to see him kind of moving up the ranks there. Hasn't really made many splash plays. He did throw Josiah DeGuara 5 yards, which was also...
So gave him the Reggie White to Chris Carter
treatment. Yep, gave him a little toss. But no, it's nice to see him earning those reps already. I think we both said hey, if we're getting towards the end of camp and he's still not ahead of Enigbar and Hollins, we're gonna be a little concerned, and it's nice to see those kind of concerns waylaid a little bit. Anything you want to add there? That was just a nice little quick hitter I had.
That's the main thing. I still haven't heard too much about like splash plays he's made, besides sort of looking good, but besides the Taguara thing. But it's good to see that they think he's progressing enough to move him up in the depth chart.
Yeah. And then I noticed you don't have any more on defense. I did have one more. If you want me to just toss it in, and then we can talk about some things we're a little worried about.
Onto that.
Yeah. So the last thing on defense was something I kind of found as I was watching the player interviews from the locker room, and that it seems like the players are getting more input on the defense. Rasul Douglas said in his interview on Wednesday of last week, this was something that I didn't see until after we recorded it, unfortunately, so it's from 8 days ago, but I still wanted to bring it up during this recording. And he said that Joe Barry met with each of the players in the secondary individually and as a group to ask them what they wanted to do in the coming year, kind of schematically. And it sounds like they came to an agreement to play more aggressively. And I just appreciate that, Barry has a lot of detractors, understandably. Last year went pretty poorly. He has a really talented defense and did not do enough with it. He made a lot of changes as the year went on. And a lot of the changes were made too late, but the defense did improve as the year went on, and I think that's the big reason he was brought back. Jair also mentioned that, he said that his words were, last year, the secondary was making a lot of excuses for why things weren't going the way they wanted them to. And he said, it shouldn't matter what the call is. We have the talent to execute whatever the call is. Like, we need to, really just, go to work and, put the work in on whatever the call is. Yeah. And we have enough talent where it shouldn't matter. And I want to just circle back to what Rasul was saying, because I like that Barry seems to understand, the best defense is the one that the players believe in, I think is the big thing. If the players believe in it, they'll execute it more soundly, they won't freelance as much, and the whole thing will work better. And I just like that the players are getting a little more input on the defense.
Yeah, I think there's clearly issues with the players not being all on the same page, because they weren't all on the same page with the plan. Especially early in the season, with the lack of communication.
And we had talked about how
Jair also said something about his. I was going to say that being more aggressive and coming up to the close to the line of scrimmage on some of those coverage plays as well.
And we had talked about last year that there were times where it felt like Barry had kind of lost the locker room, and so it sounds like being able to cede some control of the defense, I think, is a good sign, in my opinion, of what his standing is amongst the players on defense. I think that's a good thing, Yeah.
And just speaking of Rasul, as you see about the amount, the epic
tirade.
Amount of trash talking he was doing from the,
well, did you hear that
the offense?
Tucker Kraft hit him with the Step Brothers? You don't say that, which is.
Yes, I did hear he was making Step Brothers.
Have you seen Step Brothers?
Reference.
You
I have not seen Step Brothers.
You should. It's pretty good. It's good. It holds up. But yeah, that was the last of my positives. Do we want to talk about some things that we're maybe a little worried about as we wrap up here? Kind of speed through these as we're getting a little long on time.
We could, yeah. There's just a couple of things. Is it time yet to worry about Anders Carlson?
No, not in my opinion. I know it's a bit succinct.
It is pretty early.
It's very early. He's had some decent days. He's had one really bad day, and the other ones were kind of just eh. I think you have him at 16 of 27 per Matt Schneidman, which is below 60% for training camp so far, which is not good. But he has had to deal with some changes at holder. He's not always had the same holder.
This is the one thing that has not been clear from the reports, how good the holding is.
Yeah, it sounds like the holding's been up and down. The day he went 2 of 7, Waylon was the primary holder. Just something to keep in mind. So if you take that out, he's 14 of 20, which is up at 70%, which is very
was his career average in college.
Yeah, which much better.
With 70,
but
it would still be last in the league last year.
That is true. Last year, Chris Boswell was league worst at 71%. Crosby was at 86% last year and didn't keep his job this year. And Crosby's worst year was 73.5% in 2021. Carlson made 71.8% in college. But here's the thing. It's like, if this was a team that was like, the goal is to win the Super Bowl, I would be concerned. This team,
yes,
the team's success is not necessarily. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because it does matter. But
well, you know what it is. What I think is, we don't have the crushing weight of expectation. Maybe that leaves some room for joy.
But that doesn't
you get that reference.
I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it doesn't matter, like, if Carlson's good or not. Like, we should just let him. But, Bisaccia did say they want to weather the storm with him. They want to kind of ride the ups and downs of, like, having a rookie kicker. And that, as with any rookie at any position, there are always going to be, some bumps in the road. Obviously, his college resume leaves something to be desired. And, it probably gives him a shorter leash amongst the fans than he would have if he was like a very good college kicker. But, I think it's just like, it's not going to matter. I see some people being like, oh, is Crosby going to come back? It's not going to happen. Like,
Crosby's not coming back.
I would be very surprised if they brought Crosby back.
I would be shocked if they bring him back now. They've made their decision.
Yeah.
And like most organizations, they don't like to change their decisions.
And
they
I think
admit that their decision was wrong at the time.
And I don't even know if their decision was wrong.
I think, Bisaccia's... I don't. That doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, because they struggled so much on sort of the kickoff game with not ever being able to get it to the end zone.
Yeah.
But I think one thing Bisaccia says, like, well, the Vikings gave up on Daniel Carlson, his brother, too quickly.
That's
because
true.
Of basically a bad game against the Packers.
And he was pretty bad as a rookie. But now he's one of the best kickers in the league for the Raiders.
Good. But the other thing I would say, as sort of a counterpoint to that, when a different rookie is struggling, say like an offensive lineman or a linebacker, you have other ones you can put in.
Yeah,
like they have a couple bad snaps. Okay, you got to.
But you don't. For a minute. We're going to put somebody in. But you don't do that with a lineman. Like, if a lineman has a couple bad snaps in a row, how many times have you really seen him just get yanked? Like, not often.
But other positions, you have subs.
Yeah, you
like
have.
Somebody gets, and you could talk to him. It's like, kicker, you have one.
Well, yes, but kicker,
you can't say, "Oh, we're going to have somebody else kick this one kick for you."
But kicker, you can just stop going for. Like, you can just start going for it on fourth down. Like, there are ways.
True. You just.
There are ways around
it, and teams do that when they.
Yeah.
And then some of the analytics will say, like, you should be doing that all the time anyway.
Yeah, it's like, oh, look, it's actually good that your kicker is playing like ass, because now you're actually going for it on fourth down. It's you stumbled backwards into the right decision. But anyway, so yeah, I'm not super worried. Are you really worried? It doesn't sound like you are.
I'm not really worried yet.
It's very early yet, but it's very early. But yeah,
yes.
My first kind of thing that I am a little worried about is that there have been some ups and downs in the tight end room. Musgrave has kind of struggled since, like, not struggled, but, he's had some drops in training camp. He's had some, like, getting blown up by pass rushers and as he's trying to block in training camp. He did block Kenny Clark one time, which I had to triple read that and make sure I read it correctly, because that didn't make any sense to me. I don't understand how that happened. I would have thought Kenny would have just steamrolled him, but yeah, we'll take it. But yeah, so, and then, DeGuara's hurt now, unfortunately, so he's going to be missing some time. Tucker Kraft, has had a really quiet training camp. We haven't really heard much from him. Tyler Davis, I think we know what Tyler Davis is. And the fact that we're hearing a lot about him and not so much about the other tight ends does not exactly fill me with a lot of optimism for the tight end room as a whole. But, I'm still excited for Musgrave. He's still gotten open deep at times. He's had some drops, which is obviously not ideal, but he's earning targets. He's getting open, which is, in order to have a drop, you have to get open first, So that's something at least. Dad,
he has been getting open still, and which is kind of what he was doing in the spring practices.
Yeah.
He's still managed to do that. He's had some drops. But speaking of, like, O.J. Howard's available.
I saw, but I don't see it. I don't see them going down that route. I think he's kind of, that time has passed. But yeah, so that's my, like, one thing that I'm kind of keeping my eye on. I'm a little nervous about. Did you have one you wanted to add as well?
Yeah, so some of the things we talked about already. We talked about Josh Myers struggling a little bit, including the botched snaps and getting beat one-on-one. And we mentioned, you talked about some of the drops by Watson and Musgrave. They're starting to be concerning. But probably the last thing, and maybe the biggest one, is what's going on in the safety room. Who's going to step up? Who's going to look good? It sounded like Owens may have got starting snaps over Savage.
Yeah,
in the last practice,
which we haven't
starting
talked,
next to Rudy Ford.
We haven't talked about yet, surprisingly, because it's not really a positive, but the safety room has been blown wide open this past week because all through OTAs, all through minicamp, all through the first week of training camp, it's Ford and Savage. And then the past 2 or 3 practices, it's been Ford and Owens, Owens and Savage, Ford. I think each combination of them has played together. And I think even based on some just play recaps of what's been going on in 11-on-11s, I think Anthony Johnson Jr. even got a couple reps back there. So they're okay, all hands on deck at the safety room because they clearly don't feel comfortable with what's been going on, and I don't really blame them because that is, and we've talked about it. We talked about it all offseason. We talked about it during the draft. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very good draft for safeties, but the safety room is probably the biggest question mark on this entire team right now.
If Jordan Love is just decent, not exceptional, if there's one thing that's going to keep this team from making the playoffs, it's the safety room.
Safety room and run defense. Those are the two.
I'm more worried about the safety room than the run defense.
Really? That's interesting. I have to think about that. I think
they have so much more talent up front than they have in the safety room.
It has not mattered in the past. But, I mean, it has.
Did we have that much talent, though?
I guess that's a good...
Did we have that much talent in the past?
That's a fair point. It's a fair point. I see what you're saying. You're going to die faster. The old Mike Pettinism, You're going to die faster by a 70-yard bomb than a million running plays. So that's a good point, but... Yeah, maybe I am more worried about You're not helping me with my worries about the safety room. I'm getting more worried the more we're talking about it.
I wasn't trying to.
Especially with the fact that, they don't seem very comfortable with who they're starting back there right now either. And, I mean, open competition, that's always a good thing. But the fact that they feel a need for an open competition is I mean... I guess it's better than just giving it to someone that hasn't been playing well. So that's something at least.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we'll see what shakes out of there. I was surprised. I thought they would be rotating in the various new additions next to Savage, not in place of.
Do you think the favorites to start at safety week 1, assuming health, do you think the favorites still Savage and Ford? If you had to put some money on it,
I think if I had to put money on it, I would say Savage is the most likely starter of the group.
Of all of them,
not of all of them, and I am not so sure about Ford.
Okay,
it's possible. I don't know for sure just how good
he actually
Owens
is. Oh, and Owens, and more,
more,
and Johnson. It's just a
Johnson.
bunch of...
I don't think is ready yet.
No. I don't think so either.
He's only played 1 year of safety in college.
Yeah, I think people saying he was ready to start as safety, that was very premature. I don't know. But yeah, I think that is probably one of the biggest kind of grit your teeth and kind of white knuckle through it position when you're really thinking about what's gonna make or break the defense this season. It's oh man, that's not looking pretty. But Dad, did you have anything else you wanted to add that you were concerned about? I think we've touched on all of mine. This is a pretty positive podcast. We talked about a lot of good stuff today.
I think we've kind of brought up
most of our negatives,
all the little things.
Yeah,
the negatives already.
Well, anyway, thank you so much for listening, everyone. Packers family night on Saturday, so make sure to keep your eye on that. And then joint practices with the Bengals next week, leading up to the Packers' first preseason game on Friday, Dad. Is that correct?
I think it's Friday.
Yes. Well, anyway, you look that up while I riff a little bit. If you like what you heard here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes, articles we find interesting, pieces of news going around Titletown. Anything you want. It's pretty much one-stop shopping for Packers news and content. If you really like what you heard, come subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find us. We even put all of our episodes out on YouTube. If you want to subscribe to us there, it would really help our numbers. Dad, were you able to find the date and time for
Yeah,
that
so it
game?
is Friday, 4 o'clock Pacific, 6 o'clock
6 o'clock Central.
Green Bay time.
Nice. Well, anyway, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.